It flung my truck into the ditch, and she came over and hit me, knocked me down. And as that happened, the kid's truck who hit me, who hit her, his hood came off, and I didn't know at the time, but it flung like a frisbee, and it sliced the side of the car that I was standing next to. It cut right where I was standing.
One your son
But
was in, or the truck that was
the
broken?
one my son was in, it actually just kind of scraped along the side of that in the front part of the truck. But I didn't know that at the time. It had knocked me down, and I remember at the time thinking, it felt like I was in a metal mudslide. And I have pictures of this accident still, and I look at it just, there's no way in hell. There's no way in hell nobody died. And a couple days later, I was driving back out there with my son and my wife at the time, and we're driving out there. And honestly, I was telling her, but I was really trying to convince myself. I was like, I don't know how this happened. I don't know how we lived, and I'm kind of expressing that. And my very young son, who spoke really early, he could speak pretty well. His first word was Mitsubishi, which made me use that to say please. You know, what do you want? But he out of nowhere he piped up and he said, "I know what happened." And it's one of those times where you felt it, like whatever he was about to say, I knew it was going to mean something. And so I kind of pulled over, and I said, well, what happened? Tell us.
Hi, welcome to Beauty from Ashes. I'm Kim. Just want to share a little bit about the podcast and what inspired it. What's our big why? So, a couple of us, more than really, have come together and want to share the healing that we've experienced as far as letting go of the past and reframing the experiences that we've had into something that helps us grow and experience life in a way that feels pleasurable, um, to see ourselves as creators of our lives. And we recognize the value of sharing stories of overcoming that allow people to see that it's possible to shift your perspective. More and more of us are seeing ourselves as creators of our lives rather than victims of it. And it can be very helpful when you're in the midst of a situation to see that other people have overcome hardships as well and become better for it. So I invite you to, if it resonates, to share these videos with others who may benefit from recognizing the power of shifting your mindset and walking beyond the fear of a situation. If any of this appeals to you, please share and subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the episode and gain some positive meaning from it. Thanks for watching. Hi, welcome everybody. This is Beauty from Ashes, and my name is Celeste, also known as Kim. And with me here today is David. Both of us are members of the Intersection Foundation that this channel is, that this podcast is hosted on their channel. And today's topic will be on David's experience with awakening and some of his major growth moments. And I'm going to invite David to say a few words about himself before we dive into his story.
Yeah, so as Celeste said, yeah, my name is David Lloyd, and yeah, I guess you'll hear about me really soon. But yeah, I'm yeah, I don't know. I'm just this guy now. I don't know who I am anymore now. I lost that part of me. But now I'll tell you who I am after we're done. Still picking that up. Yeah,
All
kind
right.
of
With
looking
that,
forward to it.
David, tell me a little bit about your where you came from.
All right. So I've been kind of pondering this conversation, for a while today, thinking about this, and I'm going to kind of start. a childhood because there's a few parts of my childhood that really affected kind of, I didn't think they did at the time, you know. It's how those things are. Sometimes you don't realize they affect you until later in life. But so I was raised in a very small town in Idaho, and a bit large family, Mormon family actually, 8 kids, you know, like a lot of Mormons too. Um, and the one thing that I'll skip a whole lot of stuff. There's a lot of story in my life that I don't necessarily want to dive into, but a few things that really changed my life looking back. When I was first born, my older brother, who I'm good friends with and love very much, but in childhood we didn't necessarily have that relationship. Um, he was very good at following the rules right off the gate, out of the gate, I should say, and both in church and school. And when I was born, I was quickly compared to him, and you know, why couldn't I be like him? And so I often referred to him as Jesus, and you know, jokingly. So, and I, you know, not totally, but I kind of felt that I was, if he was Jesus, then I guess I was Satan, you know, because I screwed up so much. I felt like I was always being judged against him, but I never felt kind of worthy to do anything. Um, so I always had kind of one foot drug outside of the church that I was raised in. I was kind of a rebel and child growing up. And so that was one kind of experience that it really affected my life. It'll make more sense if I move forward here, but having that thought with this relationship with my brother, and I'm always kind of being compared to him, and I frankly tried not to be him. Did everything I could to break all the rules because I didn't want to be him, because I was just trying to be compared. And at the same time, in this little town, there was what I was told was this kind of satanic cult that was what was kind of popular going on here in the town. And one of my friends that I hung out with, his older brother, um, was in some kind of leadership in that particular cult. But I was young enough, I didn't really get involved with it, but I was also old enough that I could see it. So I witnessed a lot of stuff in what I now understand to just be energy. And I saw how there was power there. And it wasn't just inside of some church, it wasn't owned by what someone called God. And frankly, to me, it was really confusing because, you know, on one side, I was told this was good and this was bad. But I saw power here. In what I saw as bad, witnessed things, you know, it was unreal kind of at the time. And didn't necessarily witness those things inside the church, you know. And although later in life, I've seen some of the good and the good use, if you will, if good's the right word, of the beneficial use of energy in the church as well, you know, and some casting out of darkness and just some other pieces. And so I battled that a lot growing up. And I battled myself a lot growing up because I didn't know who I was, which side of the fence I wanted to play on. And about when I was right around, I don't know, 7 or 8, pretty young, um, maybe even younger than that. I couldn't swim very early in my life, right? So my brother, my oldest brother, not Jesus, he he was meant to watch me one day, and we went down to the river, and I was on a log, and the log rolled over and underneath the water and drowned. And at the time, it was really strange because, you know, my body may have been freaking out, but I either stepped out and I didn't see myself. I didn't have one of those out of body experiences that oftentimes near death people talk about. That wasn't my experience. But I remember seeing fish swim by and an old tire sitting off in the corner, and I was like, man, this is dirty water, you know. But I was so at peace. It was just felt fine, like there's nothing wrong. I felt very much at peace, and just there's a kind of a lot happening there, but there's very much at peace. And then my brother pulls me out of the water and revives me. And honestly, I was mad as hell. I didn't want to come back. I didn't want to be here. I didn't like my childhood. I didn't like my life. Um, and so I was really angry. I look back at like pictures when I was a kid, and a lot of pictures, man, I didn't realize how mad I was. Till I look at the pictures and I'm doing the arm folded. I'm standing 5 feet away from my family. Like I'm just mad as hell at life. I didn't want to be there.
I'm
And
gonna
so that
ask
was,
you a question real quick. So,
yeah, yeah, please.
um, you said you didn't want to be here. Was that tied to your relationship with Jesus, the brother, or was there something else to that?
Well, my father, I love my dad. He's passed away now, but I perceived him as being very abusive because at the time I didn't understand why some of the things happened that did, and it was just perception. But there was so much times, and I look back at that now, and I can see it differently. But at the time, I didn't feel a lot of love necessarily from my dad, especially my mom very much was very loving and always has been. My dad was too. I just didn't understand how he did it. He was trying so hard to keep me from doing certain things that it didn't I didn't understand. But at the time, yeah, that was very much so. It was a big part of that. There's just big families sometimes, especially in sometimes in religions, those big families are often taken care of by younger kids, right? Maybe in anywhere, but it, yeah, there was some tough times as a child. A lot of it I kind of blew off and tried to forget most of my life. Um, and so I went through that childhood, and my old Steve, my older brother, again we're good friends now, and I really get along with fine. But for a long time, I really didn't. We had a pretty brutal relationship. To the point I threw a knife at him, it stuck in the wall next to him. And luckily, I didn't hurt anybody. Luckily for me, but it was a rough kind of go. Like we really had a hard time, and eventually, we as we grew older, and some of that got a little better. Eventually, he went on a mission, and by then we were getting along a little better, and I'd kind of got over some of that, and he came back, and that's about the time, I was still in the church, but I was very much a rebel. I did all the things wrong, I didn't think I was worthy to be there, and I certainly wasn't worthy to go and serve a mission for the church. I didn't feel very. But my mom was very, I don't know, she wanted me to go, and I knew she did. And I'm a mama's boy, I didn't want to hurt mom, and so I decided to go. And so that was an interesting experience, honestly, because I first went out there, and it was really an interesting time, and I learned a lot about myself. And when I first went out to California, is where I went. I got out there in the first couple of weeks, and I decided, it's like, man, I don't know why I'm here. I was really questioning the whole thing, like, what am I doing with my life? And I don't even believe in this stuff. And I decided I would basically, pray about this and see if I'm supposed to be there. And I spent a whole night one evening just in deep study and prayer and study and kind of contemplation. And I didn't realize how late I was going, but I spent all night long. And I come to the very clear understanding that I was meant to be there that time, you know. And so I kind of went all in for a couple of years. I went all in to this kind of experience, and had a lot of really, life-changing experiences. Met some people that changed my life, and really had a very interesting experience. Although I'm not part of that religion anymore, it was still very beneficial in my life. And so that happened. I come home, and again, I'm quickly. What the problem was is even as a young child, I couldn't quite grasp how I was told one thing and shown another. Even the concepts about Christ, and like that he could do all these things, and I look around and no one's walking on water. And I thought, man, even when he was here, one of his apostles could do it. Why can't we? Like, what's the story here? Why are we being told this thing? But then we're kind of given this kind of judgment that well, you're not Jesus, so you can't do what Jesus did. Well, that's not what Jesus said. And I've always had a hard time with that kind of conversation. And so, even after my mission, it didn't take long before I was dragging a foot outside again and going, I'm just not sure why I'm here. And kind of walked down that path. Right? Um, and it wasn't long after that I met my lady. Like, I ended up getting married to. We're not together anymore. And started having kids. We had our first child, and kind of do the things that you try and do, just live and survive. And yeah, I wanted to take my kids to church, all that stuff, to try to think they must need to go because even if I didn't necessarily believe it, I felt like there's something there. I think they had to believe in something, So we again kept dragging my feet. But when my couple things happened in my life that was very interesting that changed my path. When uh, my child's mom was 9 months pregnant with my first son, I lopped off a finger, and I didn't think that would affect me, but it truly did. It changed my whole life path. It changed the way I saw things, changed the way I understood things, just a lot of stuff with that little piece. And at the time, I didn't necessarily understand how much until later in life. A few years later, that same child was about 3 years old, not quite three, and I bought this old truck and from a farmer out when I was living in Utah. We go out there to pick it up, and I start driving back. And at the time, I had a car, and my buddy was with me, and so I had this little Ford Taurus. Went out to pick up this little flatbed truck, and it had some battery issues, so we did some work on it, got it running, and headed back to my buddy's place. And my son was in my car with my friend, and they're following me in this truck. And all of a sudden, the battery just shorts out, and all the lights go out. The truck dies, and I pull off the side of this kind of old country road, pretty straight old country road, but it was just about dusk, just getting dark. And so I pulled over, and my buddy turned the car and pulled around in front of me, and so we could jump to the truck. And we're both standing in between these two cars, and we hear this screeching sound, and I stepped out from the between the cars to see what's happened. And just as I did, my buddy, I thought he stepped out too. He told me later he was moved. He said, but I just as soon as I stepped up from the cars, another truck hit her. It hit this person that had stopped behind us. That didn't hit us, but coming pretty close. And a truck hit her doing about 55 or 60 miles an hour.
Okay, I need to ask a clarification question. So I'm picturing in my mind you've got your truck broke down and you pulled off the road to deal with that, and
Yeah.
then your buddy put his truck face to yours so you could
My,
try to jump it.
yeah.
And there was
My,
another vehicle behind you. Is that what you're saying?
yeah. So he was in my car. He was in my Ford Taurus, and my son was in that car. So he was in front of me. We're head to head, and he was in front of me. We're jumping the car, and my son's sitting there because my son had a front row view of this whole thing, basically.
Okay, so your son was in the truck or in
He
the car
was
that your
in
friend was driving?
he was in the car my friend was driving.
Okay, and what was the reason why there was a car behind you?
So this other car had just come sliding to a halt, and she stopped behind us. She didn't hit us, a lady and her two kids,
Oh, I see.
and,
Okay.
and she stopped behind us in this little hatchback. And and again, kind of freaked us out. So we stepped out. If she would hit us, it would have cut us in half. And so I stepped out, and I swear, just as soon as I did, a full size pickup hit the back of her car, and it hit her so hard that she shoved the cars together, smashed them together. But we wouldn't have been in front of me. If we would have been in front of them, it would have really smashed us. It smashed them together and flung my truck up into the ditch. And we were kind of in the road because there wasn't a place to really get off the road. It had like what they call a burrow pit, if you know, there's the whole ditch on the side. And it flung my truck into the ditch, and she came over and hit me, knocked me down. And as that happened, the kid's truck who hit me, hit her, his hood came off. And I didn't know at the time, but it flung like a frisbee, and it sliced the side of the car that I was standing next to. It cut right where I was standing.
One your son
But
was in or the truck that was
the
broken?
one my son was in, it actually just kind of scrapped along the side of that in the front part of the truck. But I didn't know that at the time. Right? It had knocked me down, and I remember at the time thinking, I felt like I was in a metal mudslide, and I felt metal everywhere. And I everything stopped moving finally, and I kind of checked myself, like, am I alive? Am I bleeding? And I had a gash on my leg, but it wasn't nothing major. It wasn't no major wound, but it was a stitch worthy, but no major wounds. And I look around, and the lady's holding one of her kids and just screaming. And I thought maybe something wrong with him. And my son was in the car still, and he was fine. I looked over at him, and he was fine. He just, he's kind of wide eyed, but he was okay. and my buddy was okay. He'd already come out of the ditch and was checking on me. And then I realized that the lady had another kid in the car who, when this all happened, was tossed in the back of the car, this hatchback that had been flat down, and his head had been cut open on the where the window used to be. And I got up and after I checked on, made sure my son was okay, of course. And I'm checking on this lady, and I realized the child she held, he had a little bit of a disability, and I didn't know if initially I thought that was something caused by the accident, but it wasn't. Those two were fine. But the kid in the back, when I went back there, I thought for sure he broke his neck because he was all kind of curled up and just kind of shaking and making, just humming, making noise. And I'm like, oh God. And she had a bunch of towels or a blanket or something. I don't remember what it was. And I stuffed it underneath this kid and kind of kept him stable, what seemed like just a minute. But all of a sudden, the ambulance was there and a bunch of, the paramedics, somebody showed up. And like the kid ended up jumping the whole scene and landed on the other side of us in the ditch. And he was fine. He cut his finger or something, didn't really get hurt. Didn't seem to care that we did, actually. And I, they take everybody to the hospital. They get her and go to the hospital. I go in and get some stitches. Turns out the kid had just broken a collarbone and had stitches on his head, but he was fine. Everything was okay. And I had the stitches on my leg, but I was fine. Everybody was okay. And I have pictures of this accident still, and I look at it, just there's no way in hell. There's no way in hell. Nobody died. And a couple days later, I was driving back out there with my son and my wife at the time, and we're driving out there. And honestly, I was telling her, but I was really trying to convince myself. I was like, I don't know how this happened. I don't know how we lived, and I'm kind of expressing that. And my very young son, who spoke really early, he could speak pretty well. His first word was Mitsubishi. Yeah, made him use that to say please. What do you want? But he out of nowhere he piped up and he said, "I know what happened." And it's one of those times where you felt it. Like whatever he was about to say, I knew it was going to mean something. And so I kind of pulled over and I said, well, what happened? Tell us. And he started telling me and he showed me with his hands. He said he watched as two guys came down from the sky and they put out their hands like this. And he put out his hands. To do. I just sat there and I'm like, I don't know how to, you couldn't not believe it. It was pure truth from a 3-year-old, 2.5-year-old child. And he just expressed now. Well, that's how you're saying they've stopped the cars. I'm like, wow. I'm like, okay, what do I do with that? After I
You
sat
just
there,
gotta chill.
after I sat there and bawled for 30 minutes, I was like, all right, finished driving out and kind of looked in the area, and I was still going to church at the time. And I remember even expressing that story later to people. And some people got it, some people felt that, but I felt very judged by it. I'm like, yeah, sure, buddy, kind of thing. So I kind of stopped talking about it. I didn't really. I thought, yeah, this is not something I'm going to let someone screw with. Like I know what happened, and so I really didn't express that, didn't tell that story very often, not to very many people. And yeah, that was one of those moments. Again, I didn't have some time where I left my body and had all these experiences. I didn't even know all that happened until until a couple of days later.
Yeah, out of the mouths of babes, though, right? Like
Right.
I've had some experiences like that myself with um one of my kids when they were very young, and I won't sidetrack this, but just briefly mention I had an experience that was with a one of my 2.5-year-old kids, and it was okay. There's no possible way they could physically know this because how does a toddler speak of such things? And
Right.
that when you mentioned that you pulled the car over because you could tell that something profound was about to be said, It's like the energy lines up and you just can feel the shift, like the confidence that's coming from someone,
Right. It's pure truth.
especially for a person that age, you know.
Right. Right. I knew it was pure truth. It was pure emotional truth. And I see it much, I see it differently now in some way that why he understood that. Like and was able to express something with such deep, such deep knowledge.
Yeah.
And even then, so didn't necessarily change my life. I just thought, wow, I don't know why I'm still alive. I still had no clue while I was here. Didn't understand. Still felt like I'd done enough dumb shit that I didn't deserve to have that. It didn't slap me hard enough to help me realize that I had some other purpose in my life.
You said it didn't shift anything, but I'm curious, prior to that experience, were you still on the fence as to whether God, or whatever word you like to use, was actually real?
Well, I think at a very young age, I understood that God was real. I just didn't think he liked me. You know, I didn't think I was worthy of
Okay.
what God was. I didn't necessarily not believe in God. I just didn't believe in me. I didn't understand why I had any relevance to this whole story.
Yeah.
And, what was the point? And even then, after all that, it didn't necessarily make me stop doing dumb shit. It didn't necessarily change my path in my life. And it did, but not in the way that you'd think it would in some kind of experience like that. I
In
still
what
didn't.
way did it change your experience?
Well, honestly, a lot of it didn't change my experience until later, and that I was able to look back at it differently. It took a long time for it to change my experience.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, inside I had some different understanding, but I still didn't feel. I still, not necessarily literally, but I still thought of myself as kind of the devil. Very, very much not. I, I was going to hell probably,
When you
and it
say
didn't matter.
inside, you had a little bit of a different perspective. Can you say more about that?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
You said inside you had a little bit of a different perspective, like even though you didn't have this massive, I'm going to change my life moment.
Well, I see what you're saying, and it kind of. I mean, having your 3-year-old say that it does something to you, so there was something there, but I still couldn't understand why. I didn't. It didn't make any sense to me. Still, I didn't understand why.
So
And my life has been saved so many times I can't even count them. Some are more obvious like this, and plenty of times that looking back, I should have been killed. There's no damn way. I just shouldn't have made it. Like the fact that I'm this many years old is mind blowing. Like how I made it this far. As they say, God only knows because that's true. Like there's just
that I
it's
know
mind
quite a
blowing.
few of your other stories, I would agree with that statement.
Right, right. And because I just didn't know who I was. I didn't understand. So I went through my life, ended up moving to Georgia and kind of started working in education. I did a lot of other stuff in my life, did almost everything, worked every career I could think of, from truck driving to construction to everything. And then got into higher ed, and started working with technology and bounced ahead quite a few years. I've been working for a university system for quite a while, going on probably 20 years. So it's pretty the longest I've ever had any kind of career. Before that, I was really bounced through jobs. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I did everything. I didn't feel like I had a purpose. Um, when I finally got an education, I did feel for whatever reason, although I hated school, I barely graduated high school. I certainly didn't ever consider myself, wouldn't have thought that I'd end up in higher education working there. And I'm sure plenty of my high school teachers, would have also not believed that story. But so I ended up working higher ed for most of my life, for about 20 years. And I was working for a university in Georgia. And, I did plenty of stupid shit that I could have been fired for. I never was. But when I did what I understood to be the right thing, something that wasn't stupid, is what I got fired for. And that threw me. That completely threw me. I won't get into details of all that, but I got let go. And at the time, I was in the middle of a master's degree. But I just took me forever to get my education. Long story there, but I was just finishing my master's degree, so I was right in the center of it. I was like doing great, 4.0 GPA, right in the center of it. And I worked for this government education, get a government school, get my education. And right before that, I just pulled myself out of the church that I've been raised in. After finally, a lot of story to that, based on some experience with my own kids and some family stuff that we kind of come to some decisions with my daughter. And it was kind of she helped me to see things that I didn't see, and I understood what was more important. But pulled myself out of that religion, and so
I'm gonna reflect a little bit what you just said
please,
without diving
please.
into questions because it sounds like it's an area you're not ready to jump into. But basically, what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you felt that you had to choose between continuing to attend church or forsaking your family.
Well, I'll dig a little deeper. Like part of it, for most of my life, I called myself the hall class teacher. I would go because I thought it was good for my kids, but I didn't necessarily. I had a hard time sitting there and listening to these lessons because they just didn't resonate with me. I didn't care if Adam had a belly button, frankly, and a lot of the stories they had talked about, I didn't feel it, and so I always kind of had a foot out, and we'd go, and we never felt very at home. I always felt judged, and I'm sure it was a lot of perception because of my own childhood. I felt judged from the very early age. And so I felt judged my whole life, and don't like that very much. I'm not a big fan of that. When my daughter was about 16, she came to me and she's like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to go. I don't believe in this. And I said, well, let's let's look at other stuff. I said I feel like we need to believe in something. I didn't know what at the time. And so my whole family, we went to a whole bunch of first went to the different Christian churches, and we were living in Georgia at the time still. We bounced around to some other churches, and none of them felt right. They felt kind of even weirder than what I was used to, and didn't make any sense. So we went to some Hindu temples and Buddhist temples, and we went to every kind of philosophy, spiritual kind of thought that we could, that was around us, that we had access to, and kind of changed the whole path of my life, and I believe my kids too, to some degree. And that's when that's why we kind of pulled away from the church, and that took us on a whole new path. And then we're kind of doing that when all this other stuff came down and happened. And later, what I realized was is I was kicked out of the Trinity, kind of what I understood all of a sudden in this when I got let go from the school. So just mad as hell because I couldn't understand, like, and I started digging into it. I was going to sue him. I was just so angry at the whole thing, and I had full rights to sue him. Like everybody I talked to, yeah, you should, but it was right in the middle of the pandemic, 2020. So right in the middle of the pandemic, all this goes down. And again, mad as hell, trying to figure out how to get even and get some money. How am I going to live? And I didn't know who I was. I mean, after 20 years, all of a sudden, I thought I just lost all my friends. And the way they let me go was kind of like they blacklisted me. Like all of a sudden, I didn't think I'd ever work again in higher education. The way it all happened. And so I kind of just gave up. I I was done. I was like, what? I'm screwed. I don't know what I'm gonna do. And luckily for me, it was during the pandemic. And there's a lot of because of that I was able to live and just do nothing and not have to deal with everything. The house was paid for. I ended up putting my loan on the end of the loan. It just got a lot of things worked out. So I went and built myself a back porch, and then I sat my happy ass down on it and did nothing for about a year and a half. And the other part of this that really affected all this was right before I was let go, my wife had gone through cancer treatment, and she just barely had been kind of finishing the main treatment. and they let me go. And as soon as you let go from these jobs, you lose all your health insurance, your life insurance, everything is just gone. And so we had no medical care. We're trying to figure out, how to get that. And that was a joke. And it just seemed like the whole world took a shit right on my head. And it kind of, I don't know, that moment, it was kind of like it all made sense. I'm like, yep, it's true. I'm not worth shit. I'm not worth anything. It's all for none. What's the point? And so I really didn't do a damn thing, but just kind of hang out and visit with my kids. My older boy had gotten married, and I spent some time with him and his wife, and tried to get to know them, and spent time with my kids, and kind of dove into marijuana because when my wife went through cancer, we realized there was a lot of benefit to the medical side of that. And so we dove into that for medical reasons for her. And then I gave it up. So I didn't give two shits, you know. So I'm like, well, I'm just gonna sit on the back porch and smoke a reefer. That's what's gonna happen. So I did. And and after a while, long story short, but we I started revisiting some of my cousins, some from childhood, and putting together my past. For a long time, I didn't remember a lot of my childhood. I just kind of I pushed it out of my head. I didn't want to remember my childhood. I didn't really love it. And I went to Oregon with a cousin of mine and spent some time there, a couple of weeks out there. Just I was gonna go fishing, but didn't end up doing all the stuff we're going to do. But went out and just spent some time and got to visit him and his wife, and spent some time there with him and one of his friends as well. And I didn't know at the time. I do now, but I what I realized I suffered was this what I call a massive ego death. Is all of a sudden I'd lost all my identity. I had no idea who the hell I was anymore. And I, from further research at the time, I didn't know. I was on some super high energy, and I was trying to. I got into meditation and all that at the time as well. Because after this whole thing with looking at the Buddhist temples, and we got into meditation, and I met some people at some communities, and had dove down the line of meditation and self healing, and trying to find myself that way, which I'm really glad. And I'd also had another friend that I worked with at the college that before I was let go, him and we'd go get together and just spend hours and just research kind of not necessarily scripture, but spiritual things. Like we're trying to find our way. And he was a good kind of friend that helped me, in this direction where I was trying to figure out what's next in my life. But I get down to Oregon and I'm going through this experience. A lot happened there that's hard to even explain. But I look now and I understand that my brain had released DMT, and I was having a massive DMT experience. And again, I had no idea that's what was going on at the time. I didn't know if I was losing my mind or finding my mind. I had no idea. But I was seeing things, and the universe was showing me things that almost made no sense to me.
Back up
And
for just a minute. I have a question. So there was um you lost your job, you walked away from the church that you'd grown up at, and I think you said something else. I'm not
in
remembering.
education,
Okay.
yeah.
Um, was there something government? Oh, that was the
I
job.
worked at a government university.
Got it.
Yeah, so I was going to
And
school.
all this took place roughly right around 2020. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was all really close to that.
Okay.
Of course, losing the job and the education, it seemed like that all happened right at once.
Mm-hmm.
But the church was a little bit before that. But and again, I called that the Trinity, because I saw that as with the government, education, and religion. That's the earthly Trinity: creator, supply, demand. Creation. That's all right here. So I'm down there. I'm having all these crazy experiences, and at one point, I thought for sure I was going to die. I was going to explode into nothing. My energy was so high, I thought I was going to die. But I knew I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't ready to leave yet. And again, a lot happened with that, to the point that my cousin thought I lost my mind, and he wasn't sure what the hell was going on with me. I ended up getting to come fly back home. Some experiences on the flight back home. Again, at this time I didn't know, but I'm really up here. I'm on a DMT trip, and I come into the airport, and a couple strange things that happened that was really interesting. I come into the airport and there was a gentleman over there on his iPad and it was in Spanish. And I don't know how. I walked up and kind of next to me, I looked over and I could read everything on his iPad, but I knew it was Spanish. And I don't read Spanish. You know, like I speak very little Espanol, so take a little bit, but I don't know Spanish. And all of a sudden I'm reading it and I was going, wow, this is really interesting. You know, but at the time I was still just like, wow, this is, you know, I can do this. And like I couldn't understand why. I was just in this whole different world, a whole different experience. I get on the plane and I flew a plane I had an airline I hadn't usually flown for one, so that's I think it was Alaskan Air. But as I get on the plane, I realized my seat was right on the aisle, but I'm sitting right between a family, and they're a black family, and uh, I knew that I probably looked crazy because I could tell I was super elevated. My energy was really high. I didn't know what was going on with me chemically, but I knew there was something going on. And so I could just kind of feel him too. I could tell the guy was going, what the hell's up with this guy? You know, I could just kind of see him looking at me like, all right, buddy. And I come and I sat down and I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna go to sleep. I'm gonna put my body. I'm just gonna go to sleep because I don't want to make these people uncomfortable. And there's no way in hell I could go to sleep. But but I quickly put my body to sleep. And all of a sudden I could hear myself snoring. I'm like, okay, I'm asleep. And I didn't even realize at the time. Again, I didn't leave my body and look back at it. But I remember looking over at the gentleman and I could feel him. I could feel him just he just relaxed, like, oh, everything's fine. Like I could tell he realized, oh, okay, there's no harm here. There's just some crazy old man taking a nap. Everything's fine. And he relaxed and I slept for a while. At one point, I guess I woke up. I think I was awake at this point. But the two kids are over here and they both had their iPads and they're watching this um, some TV, animated television. And interesting, before this happened, I'd been writing a lot. And I didn't mention earlier, but after this kind of all happened, I just started seeing things. I started just math. Everything made sense. I'm seeing the geometry of the universe, and I couldn't understand why. But I started writing, and I wrote a bunch of stuff, you know, about what I understood God to be and this intelligent energy. And I wrote all these things. And another piece that I'd been writing about was was about how remember the exact details now, but it was about this whole energy movement, how energy works, and the whole system works, and this whole entire universal system of energy works. And so I'm sitting on this plane. I look at these two kids, and they're watching the TV show, and I can't recall the name of this animated show, but I'd never seen it before. I didn't know what it was, but I was just completely blown away because I'm like, I wrote this. This is just what I've been writing. I don't know how, but I wrote this, and I thought, how the hell did that happen? Like, obviously, I'm famous. Like, I don't understand where I am and who I am, but obviously, I know something. And it blew my mind. So I'm watching those kids for a while, and I was like, okay, this is wild. We landed in Atlanta, and it was a really late flight. So we flew in, and the airport's pretty much closed down. There was hardly anybody around. And and we spent some so I spent some time in the airport. I tried to get out of the airport. And again, I was super flying high on DMT. And I had no idea that's what was going on, but I was super flying high. And my phone had died by then. I did couldn't my family had no idea I was home. The flight was late getting in. A lot of stuff had happened. And I couldn't even know I didn't know how to get out of the airport. And again, I wasn't familiar with that particular. I think I was just down, frankly, in where the trains are. But I was like, how the hell do I get out of here? A lot of the escalators were closed because a lot of stuff was closed up. I was just having an experience trying to figure out how to leave this place. Finally, I find my way upstairs and I'm like, how can I get out of here? I don't have a phone. I'm not even sure how to call anybody. I walked out and there was a gentleman standing by, kind of a not a limousine service, but it wasn't a taxi service. It was some kind of car service. And a big burly guy um, standing there. And I thought, you know what? He won't be afraid of me because I felt like I was scared of people. because no one would talk to me. I was like, dude, can you help me get out? People were just ignoring me, like, this guy's crazy. And I walked over and I told him my story. I said, look, I'm coming to you because I know you're not afraid of me. And he looked at me, and it turned out his name was David. Um, and so I told him my story, and I said, and I had my wallet, I had credit cards and my debit cards and stuff. And I said, look, I'd love to just pay you to take me home. I know you don't know me. You're probably waiting for somebody, but I got to get home. And I told him my whole story, and he's like, all right, that's cool, no problem. We'll do that. And so I hop in this car and we drive it. And it was 45 minutes. It's a little bit of a drive. I'm sure it wasn't a cheap service, and I didn't care because I at that time I felt completely abundant that I didn't need anything. I was in this phase that I knew that whatever happened, I had everything that I needed, that I was wealthy, that I had everything. And I'm literally giving the guy my credit cards. I'm like, take which one do you need? Take them all. Just fill up the car, whatever you need. But he just had to stop for gas. And I was just, I didn't have any need for money at all. I felt very much like that I was wealthy, that I had everything. And he
What's
gets me,
coming to mind is the idea that, as you're sharing this feeling of abundance and then also being able to read Spanish and put yourself to sleep, quickly, and the movie that you saw yourself as having written, and I'm reminded of actually the Celestine book where the guy reaches the mountaintop and he thinks he's gonna die because he's being chased by gunmen, and he finally just surrenders and he's like, okay, I guess this is it, and he gives into it, and then all of a sudden, through a course of lots of meditation stuff happening, he becomes one with the universe. He recognizes he's all the things. He's always been
right?
things. And
Yeah,
it sounds like that's the energy that you're describing.
it
Like,
was very much that energy. So anyway, on the way home, I'm telling him all the stuff like that in my brain, I just knew that for whatever reason, I could understand how to read code. I was just telling him things about these lines, what they meant, and one of his friends called on his cell on the radio, and he had it on speaker, and his friend's name was David. So there's three Davids in the car, one on the phone, two of us. I'm like, this is weird. This David was not squared. What do you call that? But we had all these guys, and we're talking back and
you,
forth. Yeah,
like a
Q.
Kennedy.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and it was just this odd experience, right? So he gets me home at about 3 in the morning, super late. And again, I was my body was tired as hell, but I could not sleep. My energy was off the charts. Like I probably could have ran home, except my body. I tried to just kind of relax back there, but I was just motor mouthing away. My body was tired. My brain was completely escalated. So I walk in the house. My middle child was awake, and I I walked over, told him, and he already looked at. When I'd been gone a couple weeks, and I'd looked different. My body was healthier, frankly. I'd been eating good. I'd been exercising. I was down there, and I just looked different. And it had between the kitchen and the living room, there's a doorway with a little thing you could grab on the top. And anyway, I reached up and grabbed it, and I started doing pull-ups. And I'm not necessarily a pull-up kind of guy. But I remember, and all of a sudden, I did like three pull-ups so fast that my head's hitting the ceiling. And my son's looking at me like, what the hell is going on here? Like, completely blew his mind. Like, he couldn't understand how I did it, let alone. And I was just full of energy, pure energy. And it freaked him out. And he was, trying to like check on me, you kidding. And my wife then came out and was checking on me, and she didn't understand, like, what's going on? And she couldn't, it was late, middle of the night, she's been sleeping. She finally goes back to bed. I'm still worried about me, and I'm like, everything's fine. I kind of tried to calm myself down, and everything's fine. And fine, buddy. I, uh, I tried to get this energy out of my body. And I remember if people would have saw me, they would have thought I had a seizure. But I remember just shaking around, and I was just trying really hard to release this energy in my body because I knew that I just had this high. I got to get rid of this energy. So I'm just shaking myself like a crazy person. And I was up all night. I didn't sleep. I just couldn't sleep. And finally, um, my wife at the time got up and she was freaking out. She didn't know what was going on with me. And in my mind, I'm like, I knew I was okay, but I also knew that I probably didn't look okay. And I told her, let's just go to the doctor. You can have him check me out, you know. So I'm like, let's just go in. Everything's fine. Let's just go to the doctor. So she takes me down to the hospital, and they quickly admitted me, and they did all these tests, and they tested me for drugs, and they thought maybe my cousin had slipped me drugs. He did not. But I didn't know that I was on drugs. I was flying high as a kite, but it was self-induced. It was DMT. And later, I was told by some of the guys at the forest, and like that sounds like he went through what they call Kundalini syndrome. And I'm like, oh, and I didn't know what that was, but that's very much what that was. Um, Same as they get me in the hospital. I stood there. I was there for probably 3 days, which I don't remember a couple of them. They had me kind of on. They knocked me out pretty much.
And this is still in
Uh,
2020, correct?
still in 20. No, no, this was probably. It might have been a year later. It was a little while later because I remember I sat on my porch and did nothing for a while. It was probably 21 or 22. It was a little while after. So I was in the hospital for a little while, this regular hospital, normal hospital, and they did all these tests. They didn't say what was wrong with me. They finally decided to diagnose me as bipolar. Oh, like, you must be your bipolar, hypomania. Again, I didn't know that. My sister had came to visit me. I didn't even know she was there. I had no idea she came to visit because they gave me some. I think it was because all the other stuff they put me under, they kept me down, you know, and they're doing all these tests. And then they admitted me to a mental hospital. And that they, on the way out there, the interesting thing was there's usually they take you out in like an ambulance or some kind of a shuttle, but there was supposedly nobody available. So they had a police car take me out to this mental hospital. And I'm like, oh, right on. And by then, I'm the happiest guy in the nut house. Like, I was happy as hell. I thought I was on experience. Like, it was all doing it for me. The whole thing was for me. It's all a show for me. And so I get in this back of the car, and I'm like, yeah, let's do this. And he's just playing along with me. He's making it probably, I'm like, this is going to the movies, I'm in the movies. And so he takes me out there. And even when we got there, strange, I didn't go in the normal door. Like, for whatever reason, I don't know why to this day, ended up going in the back way and using some odd shower and stuff to get cleaned up. Like, it was just very strange. The whole experience was weird even getting there. So I didn't feel like I belonged there. Like it was all, I was being planted in this place. It was more like because for whatever reason, somebody had heard what I said, and I was all of a sudden famous. Like, whatever. That's what my brain was at the time. Like, nothing made sense. Like, I couldn't put it all together. And then I ended up having this would have been called probably hallucination, but I know it wasn't. It was my kind of what I call my Wizard of Oz moment. Is I went somewhere else, um, and had this experience and saw things in my future that I have since lived part of those things. That I had this whole experience. And then when I kind of came back to myself, I remember even going to a couple people in particular. I'm like, wait a minute, you were there. You were like I knew they were part of this other experience I just had. The whole thing was blowing my mind. I couldn't figure out why I was there and why I ended up in this place and why no one was coming to get me after a while. I ended up being there for a month and a half and going through all this crazy experience. I lost a bunch of weight. I wouldn't eat because just the whole thing. I was down to 140 pounds. But, I just got really super. I hadn't been that weight since I was a freshman in high school. So I lost all this weight, and I go through that great full experience. The one thing that happened there that was also really interesting and that's worth noting is I knew, like, I was the happiest guy in there. I was running around, shake people's hands. I was like, welcome, I was just super happy. At least the first couple of weeks when all this other stuff was going on, because I was somewhere else and I was just super happy. And I couldn't figure out why everybody knew me. Like everybody seemed to know me, but I didn't understand why. Even in books, I pick a book and I'd say my name on it. It just didn't make any sense. But this one gentleman was not as happy as I was. And he was pissed that I was so happy, I think. And the one time he comes up, and I don't know what I did. I just said something too damn happy. It's like one of those people just too happy, you want to shut him up. And he hit me with everything he could. He just hit me right in the face, and it hit me so hard he knocked me down. And I didn't feel a thing. Like, it didn't connect. I popped up like a jackrabbit, and all of a sudden I was like, and I looked for him, and I would ask him, dude, how'd you do that? Like, it didn't even hurt. How did you hit me so? Because I thought he was a stuntman. Like, all this is being filmed. the place has so many cameras that you look in there, you're like, obviously, like you're having that moment with Jim Carrey when I can't remember the name of that movie, The Truman Show. You're like, this is, you're all are in on it. And I'm like, you're an actor, man, and you're a damn good one because I have no idea you hit me that hard. You knocked me down. I don't even have a bruise. I can't even tell you did it. And I thought that was weird, right? This whole experience. Anyway, get out of the hospital finally a month and a half later and go through a whole bunch of stuff. And
Pause for a second. So
yeah,
tell me your theory on what you think happened when that guy pummeled you and you didn't feel any pain, you didn't have any bruises.
well, at the time I didn't understand it. But the more I researched it, once I got out of the hospital and I kind of got myself back and started kind of pulling all this together. And I've been doing writing ever since, right? And I understood what happened was my energy level. It was like my electromagnetic energy was so kind of positive. I was so happy that he couldn't hit me because I didn't have any openings. His energy was not going to come through my energy because it wasn't possible. And I'm pretty certain of that. And I know that's my own crazy theory, but I feel very certain that I know we are electromagnetic beings. My emotion was so love. I loved everybody. There was not one soul that I was upset at. I just loved. I was in the state of pure love at that time. In that few moments, in that not just moment, but in that little timeline, I was in this loving state. And I see that as my body was in such a loving state that my electromagnetic energy was all pointed positive. I was so positive about life that negative couldn't connect. The magnets couldn't come together. And I wrote something about it later and had this big discussion with AI, and I was like, I feel pretty confident that's exactly what happened. Is that's how magnet works, and we know we're magnetic beings.
So what comes to mind is, do you think that that compares any to some of the experiences Jesus had with being able to, say, for example, walk on water or walk through walls? Um,
Actually, that's a really good question, and most likely, I think it definitely does, because I think he understood energy. He truly understood he was and was able to move his energy in ways that he could do things because he understood who he was and what he was. He understood that we are energy. We are pure energy. And if our emotions are our strongest energy, we're emotional energy, motion, energy and motion. And if you understand your emotions and you connect them to your brain, if you truly understand yourself, then you become in control of your electromagnetic energy, which will let you do a lot of things that most of us would call magic.
Superpowers. Yeah.
Yeah, they think you're a superpower. I know that guy that hit me. I'd really love to meet him again and see what he thought of all that because I'm certain he had no clue how that happened. Because the look on his face was kind of he was just baffled, like he couldn't understand how he just knocked me down, and it didn't phase me at all. Like I couldn't be hurt. Even at the time, they wanted me to take this medicine, and I didn't want to take any of it. And so like, they would give me shots and do all these things, and I didn't feel it. I couldn't like there was no pain. I had zero pain. I no matter what they did to me. Later after I kind of come back around, then I started coming into a different energy because I started realizing, wait a minute, I've been abandoned here. What's going on? And then my energy changed. I didn't have that the whole experience, but for a part of the time I was in there, I was in such a state of just unconditional love for everybody that I was in a state of zero pain. And I'm sure that's related. And it's very much about the energy in us.
When
But
you mentioned that at some point you started having thoughts about feeling like you've been abandoned,
yeah,
what came to mind is a term I recently was shared by another person that he calls the egoic energy structure. In other words,
yeah,
that those energy remnants that like we have the like you just described this awesome experience where you were in pure love, and all the cool things that were going on for you,
right.
and along comes back in this other energy of something from your past basically
Yeah.
replaying.
Well, it was kind of because, when I was going through, when I first started coming out of it, and you're talking to these therapists and stuff, the first thing they asked me is, have you been faithful? And I'm like, what the hell does that have to do with you? Like but it was this massive crush to my ego, because I hadn't been. There was a lot of things that I did in my life that was not okay with, but I didn't, again, I was who I was. But when all that happened, I thought, well, they banned me because that damn nurse told on me. Damn nurse done spouted everything, so I don't know what I'm gonna do now. Like my whole family, my whole world has abandoned me because of me, So then I really went down this path of kind of have to say dissolving the rest of my ego, like really deciding that I was going to be something different, or that wasn't me. It was very much a death experience in its own way. Um, not physical death, but very much a death. To the point there was times when they strapped me to a board for 8 hours at a time because I was just losing it. I couldn't handle being in there. Give me a shot, trying to shut me out. I jumped up in a tree one time. I just all these things because I didn't know who I was. And I'm certain that a lot of that was me reconciling with my own past, looking back at my life and going, what the hell? Who am I and why am I and what am I doing and who am I gonna be? And coming out of all that. And anyway, I get home from the hospital, and it was pretty quick that I realized that, my wife at that time had gone through hell when I was in the hospital. She fought her own kind of depression in her life and her own kind of times, as we all do. And she wasn't very happy about it. And I don't think she truly didn't know anything necessarily. It wasn't like the nurse told her anything about my life, but it didn't need to be told. It was obvious, and it became more obvious. And we started having conversations because then I also got to the point where I'm not gonna lie. I was done with the bullshit. I was done with all the stuff that I thought that I was. And so I was speaking truth, and the truth was kind of harmful to people. It hurt because that's what I've been holding in. I was afraid to hurt anybody my whole life. I was so afraid to cause problems that I didn't tell anybody the truth about myself. I hid a lot of myself because I was afraid to hurt people. So I just didn't share. My spouse was going through a lot, and I was frankly afraid that it would destroy her, and I couldn't do that. I didn't want to destroy anybody. I want to destroy her, my kids, my family. Being raised religious, I didn't want to. I was trying to hide all that. But after that, I knew that was no longer. That's the other piece. That in the hospital, I come to that quick realization that there's absolutely nothing that's not known. That everything was known, and even not just the cameras everywhere, but I realized just the synchronicities, things that were happening. I knew there's everything in my life. I was being judged. It was all thrown on the table. This is your life. And everybody's already known. Everybody knows it. When people say they see their life flash before them, you're not alone. Everybody watches it with you. You're not just sitting there by yourself watching your proud of your life. You realize that everybody watches your life, at least the energy around you, these beings. And you know that there's no more hiding. You can't lie. There's no fucking point in it. You can only lie to yourself. And lying to yourself only destroys yourself. And so when I came out of that and I started basically just speaking the truth, I told my wife everything I did, walked through the whole thing, and quickly realized, well, this marriage has to stop, um, for both of our sakes. I was no longer good for her. I thought I was helping her. I thought I was good for her, but I wasn't, you know, and we both needed to separate. And it became obvious after, it took a little while to come kind of merge my two kind of my life with my new life. It's like being reborn. You can almost say that. I can understand. And that was completely, all of a sudden I was a different person. And I didn't even understand how to be that other person anymore.
So there's a lot that got shared, and we're right around an hour, but I want to ask you one more big question. Um, Stringing together a series of events like what you've described, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that have been left out because can't summarize a whole life in 1 hour.
Right.
Um, how would you say those key points? You talked about your experience as a kid, that you really struggled and you had that drowning experience, and then the car accident experience and all the stuff that went on in your house, being raised in the church with the Mormon stuff, and then moving into the near death experience you had, or rather the ego death experience that you had. How would you say, like, all of the, like, if you could picture them like dominoes, how would you describe the growth that took place as a result of a chain of events?
A lot of them, it didn't seem like growth at the time, right? It's like when people say sometimes how things happen, is they happen really, really slowly and then all at once. And that's kind of, that the big event when I was let go, that was a really big event. But I don't even know if it was the biggest sometimes, because the other piece of this that I didn't mention was in 2024, my father passed. And I mean, for a little while, I kind of wanted to smother him with a pillow. He spent a lot of his last years in bed and he was very sick and wasn't healthy. And I was angry at him. I hadn't forgiven my father. And then I realized when I was kind of coming out of all this and looking at my life, I'm like, God, I became my father. I was just, my whole life is not what I want it to be. And so it made it even harder to forgive my father. But there was a rude coincidence, or not coincidence, synchronicity when my father passed. So in 19, um, let's see, 1955, September 17th, my father was about 17 years old, and he was on his land, and there was a bale wagon that came loose and started rolling toward his house. And his father told him to stop this wagon from hitting the house. And I guess he'd done it before. He'd jump on the tongue that stops this wagon. So he runs over to stop this wagon, but it doesn't work, and he's crushed against the house, and all his pelvic bones were crushed, and really killed him. He shouldn't have lived through this. Um, and it was really, really messed up to the point that it told the Red Cross or whatever, the paramedics, when they came over, how to pick him up because they were going to pull him in half. And he goes to the hospital. He spends 5 or 6 months there. But the day after the accident, my grandmother, I were always told as kids, is this kind of hero story, this great story, this miracle story. And I didn't know that's kind of why my dad was who he was for a long time. But but my grandmother told my father after 5 or 6 months when he came out of the hospital, because they didn't want to tell him before because they were afraid that he wouldn't live because my dad was in really rough shape. She tells him that the night that all happened, she walked past my grandpa's room, past his bed, and he was in there praying to God that if someone had to die, take him. And the next day, my grandfather goes for a ride with one of my dad's brothers and was in a car accident, or one of his other relatives, and a car accident, was killed. And so the very next day, my grandfather died, September 18th. And we were always told this is this miracle that happened, but we didn't understand my grandfather's perspective. We didn't understand kind of what it really meant, right? In 2024, at the time, in 55, I'm trying to remember what the deal with 16. I can't remember what the 69 was for. Oh yes, okay. So 69 years later, to the day, is when my father passed away. So in 1955, he should have died. He was killed. 69 years later, he finally passed away at 84 years old. At the time he passed away, I was 55. I was born in 1969. And I thought, well, that's just a weird thing. Super weird synchronicity. Plus, it was the same day, and all these things that happened. And it hit me really hard. It helped me to start to see my dad differently. And I remember when my friend Bernard, we were staying there, he was renting from me, and we are sitting in the front porch and on the fire pit, and we're talking. And my niece called me, and I was talking to her about some stuff that happened in her childhood, and just talking to her and expressing the story. And I don't think she'd really heard it. And when I did, I all of a sudden I felt like I became my grandfather, that I stepped into his body. And I felt to the point like I could see his bed. I'm just kneeling down, praying, God. And I became this. And I all of a sudden understood the pain that my dad had. That for 69 years, he thought he killed his father. If he'd have just did better. Yeah. And that hit me so hard that I could finally forgive my dad and realized that he was just trying to fix me. So I could do better. He was just trying to help, but I had no idea. I didn't know that. So I let go of a whole bunch of just built up kind of hate and anger. And it was a huge thing to be able to sit and forgive my father and also to understand my grandfather, who I'd never met, of course. All of a sudden to truly, and I'm named after my grandfather. My middle name was Earl, who's my grandfather. So there's a lot of just really interesting synchronicities with the whole thing. And it meant something so deep to me that all of a sudden I was able to see my father different, myself different, and start to forgive myself. I that my other friend that I talked about earlier today, his name's Carlos Vivas, and his story. And one thing he said, there was these three things that you have to forgive. Forgive your parents, forgive people that wronged you, and there's something else.
Probably
But
yourself.
at the end of the day, it was really about forgiving yourself, right? And I had the hardest time in my life forgiving myself because, again, since a little kid, I just thought, well, I've already done things that I can't be forgiven for, so I'm just going to live until I die, and then I guess if I go to hell, I go to hell. And it took me a lot to finally forgive myself, and that was a huge part to be able to see kind of. That's when I look back at all these pieces, like you mentioned, all these parts of my life, and I knew that every one of them happened for exact reason, that nothing could have been different. Even the things that I thought were just screwed up, that I did wrong, my sins, all these things, I look back and thought that had to happen. This absolutely had to happen. I couldn't be where I am unless I've gone through things.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say because it made you who you are.
Right.
And what I see, and
But I finally realized I wanted to be this person.
yeah,
That I was okay with
that's
me.
awesome. The
Yeah.
the from my perspective, what I see, like from a standpoint of like evolution of a person, that at a very early age you had a lot of self-hatred because you were compared to this Jesus brother. And then when you drown, you recognize, okay, there's this other world of where peace exists.
Right. Peace
Um,
is possible.
Peace is possible. And then, you got back to, doing whatever, and then you had this, a lot of animosity towards the church because it didn't feel like peace was there.
Yeah.
And you went ahead and stepped into that missionary role and thought, well, okay, maybe there's something to this. I feel like I belong in this moment. And then, so again, like a glimpse of another piece of peace.
Yeah.
Um, and then you had the car accident situation. And even though you didn't think you were worthy, you were like, yeah, like, and this, correct me if I'm wrong, but the perspective potentially being like, well, I don't get why that happened, but it happened. So there's
Yeah.
got to be a reason why it happened. I don't understand the reason.
Actually, I thought my only purpose in life was to raise my kids. That my
Yeah.
kids had a purpose, and my purpose was to raise them.
Yeah.
And that's the only purpose I had. And that's why I thought this is all about my kids, not about me. I still didn't accept it like there's just some reason that God intervened or whatever you want to call God.
Yeah.
However people define that. But there was an intervention in my life.
And then you had this dichotomy more than once in your life of like good versus evil and trying to figure out, where's the line for that. And when you finally did feel like you stepped onto the right side of the line and stood up at work, you got fired for it. And then all these other things that transpired around the same time were able to allow you to let go of all of the things that you thought were true, because obviously things are just
Right.
disintegrating before you.
Yep.
And see like a whole nother wow level of peace.
Yeah.
um so it was
That's,
almost like it was a building moment. Okay, there's a little bit of peace and a little bit more and a little bit more,
it,
and then oh my God, the dam broke.
there was
um
a lot of building moments that I didn't know were building moments
yeah.
until eventually I could look back and pile of Legos and realize that I was building something I didn't know I was building.
So if you could leave our viewers with one powerful thought about um how the let me make that more simple. If you could leave our viewers with one powerful thought of something that you would love for them to really take a hold of, what would that be?
It's all about love. Like that's what I come to realize, that the only thing that really matters is love. That love is the very base of everything. And learning that you can love yourself, and learning that love is truly the most important thing. It's all about love, and understanding what the hell that means. And don't judge yourself for the little things that you do, because you just keep plugging away, because everything has a purpose. And at the end of the day, love is the purpose. That's that's kind of what I mean. That's all. It's all about love. Love heals everything. It'll heal our bodies. It'll heal our mind, and it'll definitely heal our spirit, because it's all about love.
And what I
And
hear you
sometimes love doesn't
describing,
feel like love.
yeah, what I hear you describing is unconditional love, not the ooey gooey stuff we see on TV or whatever. It's the
Right.
loving yourself no matter how many times you fuck it up, no matter how many times loving other people, no matter how, whether they punch you and slam you across the room, loving even those family members, your wife, to a degree of understanding that maybe the best thing for both of our evolution is for us to not be in the same relationship.
Right. Because sometimes that what I found, but love doesn't always feel good. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, it might seem hurtful, but the most loving thing you can do is the most loving thing you do. Like you said, you have to love even when it hurts, and and that's the hardest thing. And it's very difficult to define. Sometimes in your brain you go, but I can't do this because I love someone. I can't do certain things. I can't express truth. I can't step into a certain space because I'm too afraid of hurting them, or there's probably some selfish stuff to that too. Like, who am I hurting, them or me?
Hmm.
Both sides of that equation. But it's at the end of the day, it's all about love.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Thank you very much, David, for sharing your story. And I
thanks for listening.
wholeheartedly agree that it's all about that unconditional love, and that it very much can be challenging to say the least.
Much. Thank you for listening.
Yeah.